Maple Hollow Lane was the kind of street people moved to when they wanted quiet. It curved gently through a suburban pocket, just outside Cedar Falls, Ohio, lined with identical two-story homes, trimmed hedges, and mailboxes that leaned slightly from years of winter frost. At night, the streetlights cast a soft amber glow that barely reached the sidewalks, and by 10 p.m., the entire neighborhood usually went still. On the evening of October 17, 2001, nothing about Maple Hollow Lane seemed unusual. Leaves gathered in shallow piles along the curbs. Porch lights flicked on one by one. Somewhere down the block, a television played a laugh track through an open window. Inside the house at number 214 lived the Whitman family: Daniel Whitman, Laura Whitman, and their 8-year-old daughter, Hannah Whitman. Hannah had been born in the summer of 1993, a quiet child with long brown hair and a habit of folding her hands when she listened. Teachers described her as observant. Neighbors called her polite. Her mother said she noticed things other people missed. That night, Hannah wore a pale yellow pajama top with a faded cartoon rabbit on the front. The sleeves were too long, covering part of her hands. Her pajama pants dragged slightly at the heels as she walked. Laura remembered reminding her to brush her teeth twice. Daniel remembered checking the locks before going upstairs. They tucked Hannah into bed just after 9:30. Her bedroom sat at the end of the hallway, facing the backyard. A small desk stood beneath the window, covered in crayon drawings and a half-finished school project. A nightlight shaped like a crescent moon glowed softly from the outlet near her dresser. Before turning off the light, Laura asked Hannah if she was comfortable. Hannah nodded. She asked if the window was closed. Hannah said yes. She asked if she needed anything. Hannah shook her head and smiled. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw her. The bedroom door was left open just enough for the hallway light to spill across the carpet. Downstairs, Daniel and Laura watched television until a little after 10:30. At one point, Laura thought she heard footsteps overhead, slow and careful, the way a child moves when they don't want to be noticed. She didn't mention it. At 11:12 p.m., Daniel turned off the downstairs lights. The house went dark. At 6:04 the next morning, Laura woke up to the sound of rain tapping lightly against the bedroom window. She lay there for a moment, listening. No movement from Hannah's room. That wasn't unusual. Hannah liked to sleep in on school days if she could. Laura got out of bed at 6:17 a.m. By 6:23, she was standing in the hallway outside Hannah's room. The door was open wider than she remembered leaving it. The bed was empty. The blanket lay folded back neatly, as if Hannah had climbed out carefully, not rushed. Her stuffed bear sat upright against the pillow. Laura called her name once, then again. No answer. She checked the bathroom. Empty. The downstairs couch. Empty. By 6:31 a.m., Daniel was awake. By 6:38, they were both standing in Hannah's bedroom, staring at the open window. It was unlocked. The screen was intact. The ground below showed no clear footprints, just wet grass and scattered leaves. Hannah's shoes were still by the dresser. Her backpack hung from the hook on the door. Her jacket was still in the closet. At 6:52 a.m., Laura called 911. By the time the first patrol car arrived, Maple Hollow Lane was no longer quiet. Neighbors stood in bathrobes on their lawns. Police tape stretched across the Whitmans' driveway. An officer walked slowly through Hannah's room, careful not to disturb anything. He noted the position of the bed, the desk, the nightlight. He asked Daniel if Hannah had ever sleepwalked. Daniel said no. He asked Laura if Hannah had ever talked about leaving. Laura said no. He asked if there had been any recent changes at home. They both said no. By 8:10 a.m., detectives were on scene. By noon, search teams combed the nearby woods. By nightfall, Hannah Whitman had vanished without a trace. No witnesses, no note, no sign of struggle. Just an empty bed in a quiet suburban home. And a question no one on Maple Hollow Lane could answer. How does a child walk out of her bedroom and disappear? By the second day, Maple Hollow Lane no longer felt like a neighborhood. It felt like a crime scene pretending to be one. Police cruisers lined the street at odd angles. Yellow tape fluttered between trees and mailbox posts. The quiet routine of morning jogs and school buses had been replaced by whispers, reporters, and the low hum of engines idling too long. Detectives began knocking on doors before sunrise, house by house, story by story. At number 206 lived Margaret Keene, a retired schoolteacher who had lived on Maple Hollow Lane for nearly 15 years. She told officers she had been awake late the night Hannah disappeared, grading papers for a substitute teaching job. At approximately 10:50 p.m., she said she heard a sound outside. Not a scream, not a cry. Just footsteps on the sidewalk, slow, light, almost hesitant. She assumed it was a teenager sneaking back home and didn't look out the window. 2 houses down, at number 220, Eric Nolan, a night shift warehouse supervisor, returned home just after midnight. He said he noticed the Whitmans' porch light was off, but a downstairs lamp was still on. That detail didn't match Daniel and Laura's timeline. They insisted all the lights were off by 11:30. At number 211, directly across the street, lived Karen Mills, a single mother of 2 boys. She told detectives something that made them pause. She said that around 11:15 p.m., her dog began barking. Not frantic, not aggressive, just alert. Karen stepped onto her porch and scanned the street. She didn't see anyone, but she noticed the Whitmans' front door appeared slightly ajar. She assumed Daniel or Laura had stepped out briefly. She went back inside. Karen would replay that moment in her head for years. As detectives mapped the timeline, small inconsistencies began to appear. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just enough to unsettle. Daniel Whitman said he checked all the doors before bed. Laura said she distinctly remembered hearing the upstairs hallway creak once after 10. A neighbor reported a moving shadow near the Whitmans' driveway just before midnight. Another said they heard a car door close but saw no vehicle. None of it formed a clear picture, but together it created a feeling investigators knew well. Something was missing. Inside the Whitman house, forensic teams worked carefully. Hannah's room showed no signs of struggle. No overturned furniture. No torn bedding. No fingerprints that didn't belong. The window showed no damage. The screen was undisturbed. Dust on the sill appeared untouched. The back door was locked. The front door showed no signs of forced entry. It was as if Hannah had simply stood up, opened the door, and walked out willingly. That possibility unsettled everyone. Because 8-year-old children don't leave warm beds in the rain without a reason. By the third day, the search expanded beyond the neighborhood. Helicopters scanned nearby fields. Volunteers combed drainage ditches and wooded patches along the creek 1/2 mile from Maple Hollow Lane. Search dogs followed Hannah's scent from her bedroom to the front porch, and then stopped, as if the trail had been cut clean. That detail was never explained. Meanwhile, reporters camped outside the Whitman home. Microphones hovered. Cameras waited. Laura stopped answering questions after one reporter asked if Hannah had been unhappy at home. Daniel continued giving statements, repeating the same phrases again and again. She wouldn't just leave. She was afraid of the dark. She knew better. Detectives noticed something else: Hannah's school records. She had recently begun writing about fear. Nothing explicit. Just small things. A story about a girl who couldn't sleep. A drawing of a house with dark windows. A teacher's note mentioned Hannah seemed distracted the week before she vanished. When asked, Laura said Hannah had complained about nightmares. Daniel said it was normal childhood anxiety. Neither parent believed it meant anything. Detectives weren't so sure. By the end of the first week, Maple Hollow Lane had changed. Porch lights stayed on all night. Children weren't allowed outside alone. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Every unfamiliar car was watched. Every sound carried weight. And beneath the surface, an unspoken question took root. If Hannah didn't leave on her own, then someone else had to be responsible. And that someone might not be a stranger. By the second week, the investigation had stopped looking outward. The search grids were slowly rolled back. Volunteers returned to their routines. The woods beyond Cedar Falls fell quiet again. What remained was the house. Number 214. Detectives had learned over time that when a child vanished without force, without witnesses, without evidence of abduction, the answers were rarely found on the street. They were found inside. Daniel and Laura Whitman were interviewed separately for the first time on October 29th. Daniel went first. He sat across from 2 detectives in a small room at the Cedar Falls Police Department. His hands folded tightly in front of him. He wore the same brown jacket he'd been wearing in most of the press photos. His voice stayed level, controlled. He walked them through the night again. Dinner at 6:30. Homework at 7. Television until 9. Bedtime routine. Locks checked. When asked about his relationship with Hannah, Daniel spoke carefully. He described her as quiet, obedient, thoughtful. He said she never caused trouble, never lied, never ran off. When asked if Hannah had ever expressed fear of someone in the neighborhood, Daniel paused, then said no. The pause was noted. Laura's interview followed that afternoon. She arrived exhausted. Her eyes were red, her movements slow, as if she were carrying weight that never left her shoulders. She described Hannah differently. Sensitive, imaginative, easily startled. Laura said Hannah had been asking strange questions in the weeks before she disappeared. Questions about locks, about whether windows could be opened from the outside, about what to do if someone knocked at night. When asked why she hadn't mentioned this earlier, Laura said she hadn't thought it mattered. Detectives exchanged glances. The pressure inside the Whitman home intensified. Friends stopped calling as often. Family visits became awkward. Every word spoken felt recorded, measured, remembered. Laura began sleeping in Hannah's room. She said the silence felt louder elsewhere. Daniel returned to work after 3 weeks. Some co-workers welcomed him back. Others avoided him entirely. Whispers followed him through the hallways. Investigators requested financial records, phone logs, computer histories. Nothing alarming surfaced, but absence can be unsettling too. Daniel's phone showed no late-night calls. Laura's showed none either. Too clean, one detective thought. Life usually leaves fingerprints. Then came the first rumor. A neighbor claimed Daniel had been seen arguing with Hannah weeks before her disappearance. Another said Laura seemed emotionally distant at school events. Neither claim was substantiated, but they spread anyway. The Whitmans stopped reading the newspapers after a tabloid headline questioned whether everything was as perfect as it seemed. Police revisited Hannah's room, this time slower, more deliberate. They noticed something that had been overlooked. On the desk beneath the window, tucked beneath a stack of paper, was a folded note. It was written in pencil. The handwriting was uneven, childlike. It read, "I don't like it when it gets quiet." No date, no signature. Laura said she'd never seen it before. Daniel said it didn't sound like something Hannah would write. The note was entered into evidence, and then quietly dismissed. There was no proof it was connected, but it lingered. By the end of the first month, investigators faced a familiar frustration. No suspects, no physical evidence, no clear motive. But something else had changed. They no longer believed Hannah had simply wandered off. Children who leave don't leave behind shoes. They don't leave in the rain. They don't vanish without a trace. Someone had influenced her, guided her, or frightened her enough to move quietly into the night. At a private meeting, one detective said what no one else would. "If she left willingly," he said, "then she trusted whoever she went with." The room fell silent. It took 3 months for investigators to notice the pattern. By then, winter had settled over Cedar Falls. Snow softened the streets, erased footprints, and buried whatever answers might have been left behind. The Whitman case was no longer active. It was pending, which was how cases quietly began to die. Detective Mark Henson was the one who noticed it. He had been reviewing Hannah's school records late one evening, alone in his office, the building mostly empty. He wasn't looking for anything specific, just rereading old notes, old interviews, old assumptions. That's when he realized something. There was one adult in Hannah's daily life who had never been formally interviewed, not by patrol, not by detectives, not by anyone. Her after-school caregiver. Elaine Porter was 56 years old and lived less than a mile from the Whitmans. She watched Hannah 3 afternoons a week when Laura worked late. She picked her up from school. walked her home, made her snacks, sat with her at the kitchen table while she did homework. She had been doing this for nearly a year. Elaine had provided a brief statement early in the investigation, confirming Hannah had seemed normal in the days before she vanished. No one had followed up. At the time, she didn't stand out. That, Detective Henson realized, was the problem. When investigators finally sat down with Elaine in January of 2002, she seemed surprised by the attention. She invited them into her living room, offered coffee, apologized for the clutter. She spoke softly, carefully. She described Hannah as sweet and curious, said she often asked questions about the neighborhood, asked about which houses were empty during the day, asked which doors were locked at night. When asked why she hadn't mentioned this earlier, Elaine said she hadn't thought it was important. The phrase echoed. Elaine told detectives that on the Friday before Hannah disappeared, Hannah had seemed distracted. She said Hannah asked if adults were allowed to keep secrets from parents. Elaine said she'd laughed it off, said it was probably something she'd heard on television. When asked if Hannah had ever seemed afraid, Elaine hesitated, then said Hannah didn't like silence, that she preferred the television on, even when she wasn't watching. Investigators checked Elaine's alibi for the night. Hannah vanished. She said she had been home alone, watching a movie, went to bed around 11. No one could confirm it. They checked her background. No criminal record, no complaints, no red flags, just years of quiet. The lead stalled. Again. Without evidence, there was nowhere to go. Elaine remained a footnote, another name in a growing file. By the spring of 2003, the Whitman case was officially classified as a cold case. The house on Maple Hollow Lane was sold. Daniel and Laura moved out of state. Hannah's room was packed away, her belongings boxed, her name filed, her story archived. But Detective Henson kept thinking about the note. "I don't like it when it gets quiet." He wondered how many times Hannah had sat in silence, listening, waiting. Years passed. Technology changed, methods evolved, and with them came a second look. In Part 5, decades later, the case is reopened. Not because of new evidence, but because someone finally speaks. And what they say reopens every unanswered question. The case stayed buried for nearly 2 decades. Boxes yellowed, paper curled at the edges. Evidence logs gathered dust in a temperature-controlled room few people entered anymore. Hannah Whitman became a name spoken less and less. A photograph on a bulletin board. A case number. A story parents in Cedar Falls told their children when reminding them to lock doors. In the spring of 2019, Detective Mark Henson was 3 months from retirement when the email arrived. It came from a woman named Rachel Porter. She said she believed she had information related to the disappearance of Hannah Whitman. She asked if someone could call her. Henson stared at the screen longer than he meant to. Porter. The name surfaced instantly. Rachel Porter was 34 years old. She lived in Dayton now. She was Elaine Porter's niece. They spoke 2 days later. Rachel's voice shook at first, then steadied. She said she had been 12 years old in 2001, living with Elaine temporarily while her mother recovered from surgery. She remembered Hannah, remembered her coming over after school, remembered her sitting quietly on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, eyes always moving. Rachel said there was something she'd never told anyone, because no one had asked. and because she hadn't understood it at the time. Rachel said that in the weeks before Hannah vanished, Elaine had started locking the basement door. That had never happened before. Rachel said she once heard footsteps downstairs late at night, even though Elaine claimed she was asleep. Rachel said Hannah had once whispered to her that Elaine had a quiet room. Rachel said Hannah had asked her not to tell. When Henson asked why Rachel was coming forward now, there was a long pause. Then Rachel said she had recently become a mother, and that silence no longer felt harmless. Investigators reopened the case quietly. No press releases, no announcements. Elaine Porter was 84 years old now, living in assisted housing, memory slipping, health fragile. When detectives interviewed her again, she seemed confused. She didn't remember Hannah clearly, didn't remember the basement door, didn't remember Rachel living with her. But confusion can be convenient. A search warrant was issued for Elaine's former home. The house had changed owners twice since 2001. The basement had been remodeled. Walls moved, concrete poured, ground-penetrating radar was brought in. Nothing definitive was found. No remains, no objects, no proof, just disturbance in the soil beneath the old foundation. Too deep, too altered, too late. The case stalled again, but something had shifted. Because now, there was a story that fit. Not cleanly, not conclusively, but plausibly. A child who feared silence. An adult who controlled space. A house where sound mattered. Elaine Porter died in 2021. No charges were ever filed. No confession recorded. No answers recovered. Rachel attended the funeral. She left before it ended. In Part 6, we sit with what remains. The unanswered questions. The weight left behind. And why some cases are never solved. Not because the truth is hidden, but because it arrives too late to matter in court. There is a moment in every unsolved case when investigators stop looking for answers and start accounting for damage. Not damage to evidence, but damage to people. Hannah Whitman would have been 28 years old in 2021. If she were alive, she might have had an apartment by now, a job, a favorite coffee order, a life so ordinary it would have felt miraculous to the people who remembered her as a child. Instead, she remained 8, forever framed in a school photo taken the year she vanished. Daniel Whitman never returned to Cedar Falls. After the move, he stopped speaking publicly about the case. Friends said he grew quieter, more inward. He remarried briefly, then divorced. Hannah's name was never mentioned. Laura Whitman moved back to Ohio years later, but never to Maple Hollow Lane. She volunteered with missing children organizations, attended vigils, lit candles for children who were not her own. She kept Hannah's room packed away in storage, just in case. Maple Hollow Lane looks different now. Trees taller, houses repainted, children playing in yards where no one once felt safe. Most residents don't know the story anymore. Those who do rarely talk about it. Silence has a way of reclaiming places. Detective Mark Henson retired 6 months after reopening the case. In his final report, he wrote a single sentence that never appeared in any official summary. He wrote that the absence of evidence does not equal the absence of truth. It only means the truth arrived too late. Rachel Porter keeps Hannah's name alive in quieter ways. She tells her children why doors should stay open, why secrets are not gifts, why silence is not safety. She says that speaking late is still speaking, and sometimes that has to be enough. No one knows where Hannah went. No one knows if she walked willingly or was led. No one knows what happened once she crossed the threshold of her bedroom door. But the story remains, not because it was solved, but because it wasn't. Because unanswered questions have a way of insisting they be remembered. Some cases end with justice, others end with paperwork, and some end only with this: a name, a street, a quiet house, and the knowledge that not every disappearance is loud. Some are careful, some are silent, and some begin with a child standing in a dark hallway, deciding whether to trust the quiet. This has been Quiet Files, and this file remains open.